everyone, I'm Mandy, and this is Method to My Madness. Still holding out for questions, but I did get a suggestion for a video, so I'm going to go with that. I was asked to do a video about stigma. Now, I've talked a little bit about this in previous videos, but I'm going to go more in depth today. First, what is stigma? Webster's Dictionary defines stigma as a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And funny enough, the example they give for this definition is, quote, the stigma of mental disorder. Imagine that. So, as I understand it, stigma is a stereotype that causes hesitation in identifying as the group in question. For example, it is a stereotype that blondes have a lower intelligence. But that doesn't make all people with natural blonde hair dye their hair to hide it, and it doesn't stop people from dyeing their hair blonde. For the example of stigma, stepping away from mental health for a moment, take the notion that all followers of the Islamic faith are terrorists. This stigma may prevent someone from broadcasting or maybe even acknowledging when asked their inclusion in that group. To be clear, both these are ignorant and both these are wrong. Now, getting back to mental health, I have personally spoken with at least 5 people who will acknowledge they have a mental health issue, be it recurring depression, mania, anxiety, or even auditory or visual hallucinations. But they're hesitant to see a doctor for these symptoms because they don't want to be associated with the stigma surrounding mental illness. When you are diagnosed or labeled with a mental disorder, people look at you differently. The worst stigmas are that people with mental illnesses are dangerous. I've heard it a million times, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again. There's not a single mental illness that makes someone violent, contrary to what the media would have you believe. I know, I sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm saying it's fact, which I acknowledge is also something a conspiracy theorist would say. But just hear me out. Most of the major crimes we've had in the U.S. in the previous years that were not attributed to terrorists were committed by people who the media then labeled as mentally ill. Quick note, I'm not going to be using full names on all of these, simply because I don't believe in making these people famous or more famous than they already are. The Sandy Hook shooter, Adam, was labeled as most likely suffering from schizophrenia and OCD. Neither was ever actually diagnosed. The Aurora movie theater shooter, James, was suspected to suffer from bipolar. His only connection to mental health was a suicide attempt at 11, and him telling people that he felt he might be bipolar. Once again, never diagnosed, even when he filed an insanity defense. So, if being mentally ill really meant that you were dangerous, all you would need to get away with murder is a diagnosis. Sure, you'd be in a mental hospital, but you wouldn't be in prison. But that's not what happens. Insanity defenses only work if the individual is mentally ill to the point that they can no longer tell right from wrong or fantasy from reality. There's a reason most people don't get off on insanity pleas. Anyway, the Columbine shooters. Eric was suspected of being a psychopath, which is not actually a diagnosis, and Dylan was suspected of being depressed. No official diagnoses for either. Fortunately, this is a common theme. When something horrific like these crimes happen, the media labels them as sick, as other, so the general population feels safer. It's not a new idea either. Many famous serial killers were labeled with mental health diagnoses that a doctor who met them never gave them. Meaning there were doctors who said they might have these, but they never actually met with the men in question. John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Timothy McVeigh, all of these men were never officially diagnosed. But the media had no problem making it seem like their supposed illnesses were to blame for their actions. I think it's easier for society this way. It is easier to tell ourselves that the murderers were the way they are, not because their family or community or society as a whole failed them in some way, but because they were sick. Totally my personal opinion here. But for James, the movie theater shooter, to have attempted suicide at 11, I'm willing to bet something was going on in his life that made him not want to live anymore. Maybe that's why he went on to become the person he was. Mental illness does not cause violence, but sometimes violence causes mental illness. I am not saying for absolute sure that none of these men had mental illnesses. I am simply stating the fact that even if they did, they were never suspected of having mental illnesses until after their crimes were committed. That the mental illness was used as a scapegoat for why these men turned into monsters. Maybe they did have a mental illness. I don't know, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's a lot more common than people think. 1 in 4 adults have been diagnosed with mental illness. Think about how many adults you know. 1 in 4. That's 26.2% have mental illnesses, and that's not even counting all those who are too concerned with stigma to seek treatment. Now, to put this in perspective, based on the 2004 census results, roughly 57.7 million people out of 319 million people in the U.S. had a mental health diagnosis. 57.7 million. Don't you think that if we were all dangerous, we would have had a much bigger problem by now? And the big baddie diagnosis, schizophrenia, the one everyone is so scared of, affects 1.2% of the U.S. population. I know 1% doesn't seem like a lot, but considering how big the U.S. is, that's 3.2 million people. If every schizophrenic was a serial killer, I'm pretty sure there'd be far less people living in the U.S. My point of this video is to show that just like stereotypes about race or religion or gender are stupid and wrong, so are the stereotypes and stigmas about mental health. I wouldn't be afraid to go to a doctor if I was worried about having diabetes or cancer. So why should I be afraid to go about hearing voices? But Mandy, you say, the voices aren't going to kill you if left untreated. Mental illness won't take your life. Bullshit. Do you know how many people take their own life each day in the U.S. because of the struggle with mental illness? 120 people. That's 1 suicide every 12.3 minutes. So don't think it isn't a possibly life-threatening illness. Those who commit suicide are not weak. Their illness is just stronger. Anyway, I shouldn't be nervous about going to the doctor about my voices, but I am. And not because it's going to change who I am as a person, they're already there. I get scared because of that stupid label. Will it cause others to treat me different? Will it affect if I get jobs in the future? Will it affect if I adopt a child in the future? All of these are serious possibilities. So I understand why people are hesitant to get the diagnosis that could possibly wreck their life. I have spent countless hours in the past few months dreading my new diagnosis, which I still haven't received, by the way. And that's just adding one more pebble onto the mountain of crazy that I am. For someone without any mental health diagnoses, I'm sure it can be really intimidating. I don't mean to discourage anyone from seeking help, quite the opposite actually. I'm hoping to make this ignorant stigma known, and thus make it lessen or even go away completely. Maybe if we work together on this, we can eliminate stigma. We can take away all the reasons to hide a mental illness, and we can create a supportive environment for those who need our understanding. Okay, I don't want to make this video too long. I was told shorter format is easier to watch. As always, please comment below or message me with any questions or suggestions for videos. And if you like these videos, subscribe or share it with a friend. I want to get this positive message out there, but I need your help to do it. See you next week.